At 3:17 a.m., Lucas Harrington's phone began to tremble on the nightstand, like it was afraid of its own news. He clawed out of sleep and found the screen. An unknown number, local, the kind hospitals use because they don't want you to ignore destiny. He answered with a voice that sounded older than he was. A woman introduced herself as the night clerk at Coastal Memorial. There had been a storm-slick pileup on I-5, and Emily Carter had come in critical. She'd given them his name. Then the clerk kept talking, but the words warped, something about family, consent, next of kin, until the sentence that cut clean through him. And Mr. Harrington, there's a baby, 14 months. Her name is Lily. Lucas was standing before he knew he'd moved, cold air needling his bare feet. There was no frame in his head for a world where Emily had a child, where he had a child, and the world had somehow kept spinning without asking permission. He dragged on jeans, the first hoodie he found, and his running shoes without socks. Outside, San Diego pretended it was a different city. Palms bent like question marks, gutters overrunning, the ocean's breath carrying electricity. He drove with both hands, strangling the steering wheel, wipers slapping, a red pulse in his vision that matched the hazard triangles scattered along the freeway. Every mile unrolled a year of what-ifs. Coastal Memorial at night looked like a ship bracing through weather, glass doors sliding open with a sterile sigh. The lobby clock insisted it was still 3-something. Time here had refused the idea of morning. A security guard with a crossword glanced up and asked for his ID. Lucas couldn't remember if he'd brought a wallet. He said Emily's name. He said the baby's name, tasted it, broke on it. The guard softened, buzzed him through, and pointed toward the ER bay. The hall smelled like antiseptic and wet wool. A nurse with a coffee the color of motor oil met him halfway. "Lucas?" she asked, like trying the shape of him on for size. "Yes." "I'm Rachel, come on." She had the practiced gait of someone who moved quickly without ever seeming to rush. "Emily's in the OR. Trauma team's with her." Rachel watched his face as if she were triaging his soul. "There's someone you need to meet." The ER waiting room was 1 part aquarium, 1 part chapel. Chairs in rows, TV on mute, the commentary of the storm steady on the windows. In the corner, a child sat with her knees in, a teddy bear pinched in both hands by the ears until its stuffing heaved up like a breath. Her hair stuck to her forehead in damp little commas. Her cheeks held the last bright lines of crying. The girl looked up when Rachel and Lucas approached, and Lucas felt something rearrange in his chest with a gentle, irreversible click. The fear there was real, but there was also a steadying recognition. The way you look at a word you somehow know how to read. "This is Lily," Rachel said, crouching. Her seat was rear-facing, straps snug, miracle of miracles. "She has some bruising, but she's okay. We ran her blood, checked her vitals. She's been asking for Mama." The teddy bear had a stitched smile going crooked. Lily turned it toward Lucas, as if letting the bear meet him first. His hands, traitors to his mind, reached out before he formed the thought. When he lifted her, she was lighter and heavier than anything he'd ever carried. The weight was specific, a lived-in gravity that made the rest of the world feel faintly theoretical. On the plastic chair beside where Lily had been perched lay a blue knit scarf, crumpled, rain-dotted, a loose thread like a vein. Lucas knew it instantly, the way you know a scar by touch. It was the scarf Emily had left behind, on his couch, folded badly, on the afternoon she'd stood in the doorway, eyes on the floorboards as if reading a map out of his life. He'd kept it for a while. Then he'd tucked it into a box. Now it was here, soaked through with a night he hadn't yet survived. He picked it up, and the scent of cold air and something like lavender rose off it. A ghost that didn't know it was a ghost. "Did she say anything?" he asked Rachel, voice low, Lily's hair warm against his jaw. "Not much. She was in and out. Front-end collision, hydroplane, median bounce. Paramedics said she kept checking the car seat. She asked if someone had called you." Rachel's gaze held him steady. Then, right before they wheeled her up, "Lucas, take care of her." He swallowed hard, the words catching on a dry place that hadn't existed a minute ago. The storm brought a brownout flicker through the ceiling lights, and for a heartbeat, the whole room had candlelight honesty. Somewhere behind a wall, a monitor protested, then made peace. A resident in scrubs approached with a clipboard clutched like a shield. "We'll need consent for some decisions if we can't reach any blood relatives," she said, the voice of systems and safeguards. I'm not—" Lucas started, then stopped. He looked at Lily, at the small constellation of milk-dry skin at the corner of her mouth, at the crescent moons her nails had pressed into the bear's felt. He looked at the scarf. "I'm here," he said instead. "I'm the one who's here." They led him through the motions. Sign here, initial there, emergency contact, allergies unknown, pediatrician unknown. Each blank was a confession. Each line was a vow. He gave his number for everything. He gave his address. He gave more than he knew he had the right to give. Rachel guided it along, smoothing the pages, translating the hospital's Latin into kindness. At some point, his phone buzzed itself across the chair. Board emails, investor pings, a calendar alert for a 7 a.m. call to prep a product announcement. He let it go. The screen dimmed, embarrassed for trying. Lily dozed on his chest, breath whistling soft through a nose that had probably learned the shape of lullabies he hadn't heard. He stood and walked because sitting felt like surrender. Out past the automatic doors, the ambulance bay glistened like a stage set that had lost its actors. A delivery driver hunched under a jacket. A paramedic laughed at something only the paramedic understood. These were the trappings of a life that had continued while his own took a hard left. Rachel joined him at the window with 2 paper cups. The coffee was terrible in a way that made it honest. "Storm's supposed to clear by dawn," she said. "It always does. What happens if—" He didn't finish. The sentence had cliffs he wasn't ready to look over. "Then we do what people do," she answered, not coddling, not cruel. "We make a plan that's good for Lily today, and we make a new plan tomorrow." She hesitated, then added, "You're doing fine." He wanted to say he wasn't, that he didn't even know how to be a person in this version of his life, let alone a father. Instead, he nodded. Lily shifted, hunting the familiar in him with a small, seeking hand that found the drawstring of his hoodie and held on. A surgeon finally came down, eyes like polished stones, voice trained to deliver news without letting it own you. "Emily's stable for now," he said. "We repaired internal bleeding and set a fractured clavicle. There's swelling we're monitoring. The next 12 hours are important." The words were rails to set the night upon. "You can see her briefly before we move her to ICU." They took an elevator that climbed like a held breath. The corridor outside the recovery room hummed with hidden machinery. Inside, Emily lay pale in a way that erased the California from her, hair damp, lips cracked. A bruise pooled along her collarbone like spreading ink. Wires stitched her body to beeping logic. The machines made a lullaby of persistence. Lucas stood back at first, Because the idea of stepping into the space between the person you were and the person you have to be is always terrifying. Then he moved close. He laid the blue scarf along the blanket, smoothing it as if it could remember warmth and transfer the memory. He didn't touch her hand. He wanted to, but his want felt clumsy, and he refused to make this about him. Instead, he spoke her name, quiet, as though it were a password the night would honor. "Emily," he said, "I'm here. I have her. I've got Lily." He felt Lily's small body lean, as if agreeing. The storm shifted gears outside, rain softening from fury to insistence. Tomorrow's world waited just beyond the glass, but the room held 3 people bound by something they had no language for yet. Lucas listened to the machines count time, and for the first time since the call, he breathed all the way in. He didn't know the rules. He didn't know the next move, but he knew this. He wasn't leaving. Not now. Not again. And when the lights flickered once more and steadied, he told himself that was the universe blinking and staying open. A year earlier, San Diego had been bathed in late summer gold. Lucas remembered the light then, how it lingered at the edges of things, warm but never heavy, as if the city itself was holding its breath. His company, then a hungry young tech firm with a product that investors were calling the next big disruptor, was on the cusp of going public. He lived in a high-rise with floor-to-ceiling glass, ate most meals standing up, and spoke in the language of venture capitalists and quarterly projections. But in the evenings, he'd find Emily sitting in the bay window, knees tucked under her, holding that blue scarf like it was the last solid thing in the world. She wasn't the sort of woman who filled silences with chatter. She let them stretch, taught him that not every pause was a void that needed patching. Sometimes, though, her quiet wasn't peace. It was retreat. Her eyes would fix on the middle distance, as if watching a memory play out somewhere only she could see. When he asked about her family, her voice would turn almost clinical. She'd once told him about her older brother, Mason, who'd been brilliant when sober and a stranger when high, how he could light up a room or drain it dry. She mentioned a father who'd started out tender, almost overprotective, then hardened into someone who locked his affection away like cash in a safe. She never spoke of her mother. Lucas thought she'd tell him in her own time, so he didn't push. Back then, he believed that giving her space was love, but that space grew teeth. It began with canceled plans, her just needing some air or a day to herself. Then came the nights she'd disappear into a walk along the shoreline, leaving her phone behind. The first time she didn't come back until dawn, Lucas told himself she'd been sorting her thoughts. The second time, he noticed she'd washed her hair in the sink at a 24-hour diner. By the third, he knew something was slipping out of reach. But every time he asked, she'd smile like he was making too much of it. And still, the moments between the vanishings were good, better than good. She laughed at his terrible cooking, learned the names of his engineer's kids, and could fall asleep mid-sentence on the couch while he worked beside her. They made each other playlists. They dreamed about traveling after the IPO. There were nights she'd trace patterns on his chest and whisper things she'd never write down. He told himself that whatever haunted her would fade once life became more stable. But stability never arrived, at least not in the way he imagined. The IPO announcement loomed like a second sun in his sky, blinding him to everything else. His calendar was a war zone of meetings and calls, his mind always 2 steps ahead. And somewhere in that glare, Emily began to vanish for longer stretches, returning with eyes that seemed to take a moment to remember him. One night, She sat in the window with the scarf wound tight in her hands, twisting it until the knit stretched. Lucas had just gotten off a call with the board, flushed with good news. He told her about a new investor, about the stock projections, about the champagne the team wanted to pop when it all went through. She listened, but her smile never reached her eyes. "You're going to be fine," she said finally, almost to herself. "I know," he said, grinning, not catching the weight in her tone. The next morning, she was gone. Her clothes were still in the drawers, her toothbrush on the sink, but the scarf was missing from the chair, and her phone was off. There was no note, no last message, just the absence of her voice and the strange, hollow quiet it left behind. For days, Lucas told himself she'd call. For weeks, he told himself she'd walk back in. And after months, he stopped telling himself anything at all. Until, at 3:17 a.m. on a storm-torn night, the phone rang. Morning came in pieces, coffee gone cold twice, a lullaby of IV pumps through the ICU walls, a 14-month-old orbiting his chest like a moon that couldn't quite settle into sleep. Lucas learned quickly that time with a baby doesn't run in straight lines. It loops, it doubles back, it sprints, then trips over a sock on the floor. He'd thought he understood busy. He'd founded a company. He'd shipped features at 3 a.m., charmed rooms full of skeptical investors, and survived a product failure post-mortem with nothing but dry mouth and a whiteboard marker. But nothing had prepared him for the way a toddler could colonize every minute. The way Lily could turn an 8-ounce bottle into a high-stakes negotiation with God. Rachel, the pediatric nurse with the calm of a lighthouse, caught him at the doorway of the family room, where new parents in borrowed sweats practiced hope in low voices. "You're holding her like a football," she said, amused, then gentled his posture with a nudge. "Think hammock. Make yourself into something soft." She showed him how to tuck Lily's hips into the crook of his arm, palm open across her back. She pressed a warm compress against Lily's tiny belly until that sharp, fussy cry deflated into a sigh. "Gas," she said, like it was a person to be escorted out. "You'll both live." He repeated her steps like choreography. The second time went better. On the third, he added a sway he'd seen in another dad's hips and felt ridiculous until Lily's breathing synced with his. When he thanked Rachel, she shrugged. "Muscle memory? You'll get it?" Then, quieter. "Most people do if they want to." Want. The word stuck. In the corner of the family room was a microwave that sang the world's saddest victory tune. He sterilized bottles while listening to the hospital's midday rhythm, a janitor's cart squeaking in tired beats, the muted laughter of nurses trading gallows humor, the weather on a TV that no one watched. Somewhere down the hall, a new baby cried. Somewhere else, something flatlined and came back. Between feedings, he fought his other life through a screen. He propped his laptop on a stack of Good Housekeeping magazines and joined a board meeting on mute, a burp cloth slung over his shoulder like a surrender flag. The CFO looked worried in the tight way of someone babysitting bad news. An investor asked a question that wasn't a question. "How's leadership stability?" While Lily, perfectly timed, let out a trumpet of pure bodily autonomy. Someone on the call laughed before they remembered they were on the record. "We can circle back," Lucas said, voice even. "Short answer, I'm here. I'm on top of what matters." "Define matters," another director said, clipped. Lucas thought of a blue scarf folded across a hospital blanket, of Rachel's compress turning an infant's pain into peace, of the way Lily's hand sought the drawstring of his hoodie like a talisman. "Everything," he said. and left the call before they could vote on what that meant. In the late afternoon, a knock came at the family room door that wasn't hospital quiet. Madison walked in. She wore a raincoat the color of litigation and eyes that were cataloging the room before they found him. Emily's older sister had the kind of posture that announces it has arrived to fix things, and maybe break a few on purpose first. "You didn't answer my texts," she said, lifting a white paper bag that smelled like almond croissants, as if you could feed a problem into submission. "I've been occupied," he said. Lily, as if on cue, clung harder. Madison tried to smile. It didn't cooperate. "Can I hold her?" It sounded like a challenge wrapped in courtesy. He handed Lily over because that was the right thing to do, because family matters and because there were rules here he didn't want to break. Lily toddled that accomplishment of a girl, then folded in Madison's arms and, after a beat, crumpled into tears. Not the fussy kind, not an overtired complaint. The deep animal sob that wanted the shape of one person and not another. Madison stiffened. "Well," she said, cheeks coloring, "babies pick up on stress." Lucas took Lily back. Tears shut off like a faucet. He knew that wasn't a verdict. Babies are weather. But something in him, something primal and unambiguous, rooted deeper. Madison scanned the bottles in the drying rack, the scattered wipes, the backpack half unzipped and overflowing with tiny civilization, diapers, formula, a board book with teeth marks, a pediatric discharge sheet he'd underlined like scripture. "You look overwhelmed," she said. "I am," he admitted, "and I'm learning." She set the croissants on the table but didn't sit. "The social worker called me," she said, "because I'm next of kin. She said if Emily doesn't wake up in a timely manner, there will be proceedings, temporary guardianship, verifications, home checks." Her mouth tightened on the last words. "I'm just making sure Lily's safe. She's safe with me." Madison's gaze flinched toward the laptop, toward the echo of the board meeting still hot in the air. "Are you sure you can be two people at once? The CEO and the... this?" She waved a hand at the evidence of bottles and baby wipes like a prosecutor presenting Exhibit A. He almost told her about the way his company had taught him to split himself into scheduled fragments. Founder, fundraiser, firefighter. He almost argued that love is an economy that runs on different math. Instead, he said, "I can be her dad." The words surprised him by fitting. Madison didn't answer. She took out her phone, opened the camera, and after a micro-pause that felt like a decision, snapped a photo. "For Emily," she said, as if that absolved the click. Rachel pushed the door open with her hip, reading the room like a triage chart. "Visiting hours for ICU will open again in 15, she said mildly, then nodded to Madison. "There's good coffee on the 3rd floor if you know which nurse to bribe." She turned to Lucas. "And don't forget the lotion on Lily's cheeks. The air in here is arid." After Madison left, Rachel lingered. "She's scared," she said. "Fear does funny things. It puts on armor and calls it virtue." "I know," he said. "I'm scared too. Difference is you're letting it make you softer." She handed him a tiny bottle of unscented lotion, and a smile people probably fell in love with at least once. That usually wins. Evening leaned in. He took Lily to Emily's room when the ICU doors opened. The monitors blinked their stubborn constellations. Emily lay still, a delicate geography of bruises fading by millimeters. Lucas settled in the chair and read aloud from the hospital's ancient copy of Goodnight Moon, because his own voice felt like something he could give. Lily pressed her palm into the blanket near Emily's hand, as if to memorize the texture. When the nurse dimmed the lights, Lucas pulled the blue scarf up over Emily's shoulders. The scent of rain and lavender had thinned, but it was still there if he pretended. A fire alarm chirped once and gave up, a false start that spiked his heart rate and then left him shaky with its nothingness. The night nurse apologized from the doorway. "Storm messed with the panel," she said. "It's all clear now." On the way back to the family room, he passed the social worker, Amanda, a woman with careful hair and a tablet held like a delicate secret. "Mr. Harrington," she said, "we'll need to formalize a temporary care plan for Lily. Nothing adversarial, just paperwork that lets us keep her with someone who can legally consent to her needs. If Emily's sister is available, we usually—" She let the sentence drift into suggestion. "I'm available," he said, voice steady. "I'm caring for her now." Amanda studied him the way people study oceans for rip currents. "All right," she said. "Then we'll schedule a home visit. Very routine." She looked like she meant it. She also looked like she'd said the same words to people who later turned out to be storms. Back in the family room, Lily fell asleep heavy and hot on his chest. The kind of sleep that makes an adult sit taller so the child can sink deeper. He opened his laptop to draft an email explaining his temporary leave and found 3 messages waiting like wolves. One from a director with bullet points about crisis containment, one from legal advising discretion, and one from a reporter he didn't know. Phishing. Sources say you've taken custody of a child connected to a former relationship. Comment? He closed the laptop. The croissants had gone cold. He ate one anyway, because some kindnesses are small but measurable. He set the crumbs aside and looked at Lily's slack mouth, the way her lips pursed and relaxed in tiny dreams. Fear knocked again, but this time it didn't feel like a villain to defeat so much as a teacher with unpleasant homework. He could learn this. He was already learning. Tomorrow he'd baby-proof a home he barely recognized. Tomorrow he'd buy outlet covers and yogurt melts and a car seat that didn't come with a headache. Tomorrow he'd call Amanda and say yes to whatever inspection she wanted. Tomorrow he'd bring a copy of the Blue Scarf story to the person who kept score. A shadow crossed the glass of the family room door. Just a passerby, he told himself. But the shape paused, as if peering in. He felt that flick of heat under the skin, the sense of being watched by a world that always wants to turn a private grief into public content. He tightened his hold on Lily and whispered into her hair. "We're okay," he said, as much to himself as to her. "We're going to be okay." The door eased open on its hinges. Madison stood there again, damp from new rain, eyes sharper than before. She held up her phone without stepping inside. On the screen, a headline glowed like a flare. San Diego tech star sighted cradling mystery toddler at Coastal Memorial. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The storm had found them another way. Rachel's voice came from behind him, steady as a metronome. "Lucas," she said, "the ICU called. Emily's vitals just shifted, in a good way. If you want to be there, now's a fine time." Between a breaking story and a heartbeat changing its mind about the future, he chose the second without pausing. He stood, hoisted the diaper bag, tucked the blue scarf into the crook of his arm, and followed the promise of good news down the hall, carrying the baby, the fear, and the stubborn, unglamorous decision to keep showing up. The next afternoon, rain came down in long, slanted sheets, blurring the city into watercolors. Lucas had walked Lily around the pediatric wing twice already, her small fingers gripping his thumb like an anchor. When her eyelids began to droop, he settled her in the hospital's loaner stroller, a squeaky, candy apple red thing with one wheel that refused to track straight. and stepped out toward the cafe across the street. The place was small, tucked between a laundromat and a flower shop. Its sign read, "Harbor Brew" in chipped white paint. The kind of place where the air smelled of espresso and cinnamon even in a downpour. A bell over the door announced them as they rolled inside. Warmth hit first, then the layered hum of conversations, the hiss of steaming milk, the low thud of cups on wood. Lucas ordered a black coffee, partly to stay awake and partly because holding something hot gave his restless hands a purpose. He found a corner table with a clear view of the stroller. Lily, half asleep, sucked absently on her pacifier. The window beside them had a rivulet that caught light and ran like quicksilver. It was there, in that wash of ordinary comfort, that Henry arrived. He was in his 70s, maybe older. His raincoat darkened to nearly black, droplets clinging to the brim of a felt hat. He moved with the deliberate care of someone who knew that haste wasn't the same thing as speed. When he spotted the empty chair across from Lucas, he paused, as if measuring the kind of man sitting there. "Mind if I?" Henry asked, gesturing. Lucas nodded. "Go ahead." Henry lowered himself into the chair with the quiet sigh of old hinges. He ordered tea without glancing at the menu, then leaned his forearms on the table. "Your little one's beautiful," he said, nodding toward the stroller. "Thanks." Lucas hesitated, then added, "She's new to me." Henry's eyes softened in the way strangers sometimes manage without knowing your story. New doesn't mean you haven't been hers all along. Just means you're catching up. It was the kind of statement Lucas might have brushed off from anyone else, but Henry's tone had no agenda, only the slow warmth of memory. They talked in the easy, staggered way of men unaccustomed to speaking deeply with strangers. Henry shared how he'd lost his wife in a highway accident 35 years ago, how their daughter had been 2 at the time. "I made a lot of mistakes," Henry said, stirring his tea though he hadn't added sugar. "Thought I had to be both parents perfect all the time. But the truth is, kids don't need perfect. They need presence, and they need you to say the things you feel while there's still time." Lucas looked out the rain-streaked window, the words settling uncomfortably in his chest. Henry tapped the table gently. "Don't let silence say the words love should speak." Something in that sentence snagged. It was too close to the jagged edge he'd been circling since Emily's disappearance. Too close to the space where his own unspoken questions had lived. Before he could form a reply, the bell above the cafe door rang again. Rachel walked in, damp hair tucked under a hood, scanning the room until she saw them. "I was looking for you," she said, pulling off her coat. "Emily's condition is holding steady. The swelling's not getting worse." She smiled down at Lily. "And this one charmed the whole pediatric staff while you were gone." They sat together for a few minutes, Rachel asking about Lucas's coffee and Lily's nap schedule like they were old friends. When she stepped away to take a call, Henry leaned in. "That nurse, she cares. You can tell." Lucas nodded. "She's been more than I expected." Henry smiled faintly. "Good people show up in storms." He rose then, adjusting his hat. "You've got a long road ahead, son, but roads don't walk themselves. Remember, say the words." By the time Lucas paid the bill, Henry was gone, the door swinging shut on another curtain of rain. Back at the hospital, the air smelled faintly of bleach and hand sanitizer. Lucas wheeled the stroller into the ICU lobby, where the nurse on duty stopped him with a raised palm. "Hold on. Before you go in. I was with Emily earlier," she said. "She was drifting in and out. Right before she faded again, she whispered something." Lucas's breath caught. What? She said, Lucas, take care of her. The words landed like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known was there. They weren't a request. They were an instruction, a trust handed over in the simplest terms. He swallowed hard, the memory of Henry's advice threading with Emily's voice. Don't let silence speak for love. Say the words. In the dim ICU light, Lucas settled beside Emily's bed, Lily perched on his lap. The monitors ticked in patient rhythm, the storm outside softening to a persistent drizzle. He bent closer, his voice low but certain. I will, he said. I'll take care of her. And I'll be here when you're ready to hear everything I should have said before. Lily's small hand reached out and brushed the blue scarf folded on the blanket, like she too was making a promise. And for the first time in days, Lucas felt something close to solid ground beneath him. Not because the storm was over, but because he'd decided which direction to walk. The first journal fell out of the canvas tote like a confession that had waited too long. Lucas found it wedged beneath the spare onesie and a packet of baby wipes in Emily's overnight bag, the one paramedics had thrown into the ambulance in the chaos. The cover was soft, corners blunted, pages bearing the faint perfume of old paper and cheaper lavender. Lily was finally asleep in the loaner crib. The ICU machines made their soft, stubborn music down the hall. Outside, the storm had simmered into a damp hush that made the whole hospital feel like it was keeping a secret. He opened to the middle. Emily's handwriting was the same precise print she used on grocery lists, as if neat letters could keep messy feelings from spilling. Some days I feel like a house with too many locked rooms. I want to hand him the keys, but what if he gets lost inside? Dad's love had a curfew. Mason's did too, whenever he was chasing a high. I keep thinking Lucas deserves a life unshadowed by my family's weather. If I tell him everything, will he pretend the sun's still out? Or will he try to hold an umbrella over both of us until his arms give out? He swallowed. The next entry flicked him back to a night he'd almost forgotten. The one where he'd joked about chasing unicorn valuations while she twisted the blue scarf in her lap. He's good, not just at work, at hope. I'm afraid he'll choose me over the dream he's been building since before me. And I don't want to be the woman who becomes the reason he resents the life he didn't chase. He kept reading in low light, the room's clock clicking like a metronome for truths finally spoken. The entries sketched a life he knew only in outlines. The older brother whose apologies came like weather reports promising sun. The father whose affection ran on a timer and then on fumes. The silence that grew teeth when she moved to San Diego and taught herself to survive by speaking less. The motifs kept repeating. Fear of abandonment, fear of being a burden, fear that love is a limited resource you can waste by asking for too much. And under all of it, an unwavering, unromantic care for him that made his chest ache. I would have carried it, he whispered to the quiet room. He meant the history. He meant the present. He meant the baby sleeping 10 feet away and the blue scarf draped over the ICU chair. But the pages didn't answer. Morning cracked the sky open without asking if anyone was ready. Lucas strapped Lily into the squeaky red stroller and slipped out for air, journals tucked under his arm as if they might blow away. In the elevator down to street level, Lily tried to eat a corner of the strap and laughed at her own audacity. It was the kind of small resilience that made him believe he could do this, that love was a muscle that strengthened with use. The parking structure smelled like wet concrete and coffee. As he crossed toward the cafe for a croissant and a plain yogurt he would pretend she liked, a camera shutter clicked with a sound that no longer belonged to film. Lucas looked up. A man in a damp windbreaker stood half-hidden behind a pillar, lens already refocusing. The stranger's smile was apologetic, the way a warning is polite. "Mr. Harrington," the man called, angling for a face shot and the stroller in the same frame. "Quick comment? Folks are saying you've been camped at Coastal with a toddler. Relationship to the child?" Lucas kept walking. The stroller's front wheel chirped its descent, wobbling like a drunk. He angled toward the curb cut, planning a clean exit into the cafe, planning coffee, planning to become invisible. "Come on," the man coaxed, voice turning sugar into needles. "Help me get it right. Last thing you want is people guessing. Is this the love child? Is the mom your ex? Is she inside? Did you know?" Lucas pivoted hard, the stroller front wheel catching, his free hand steadying Lily with a soft shh that felt like a secret handshake. "No comment," he said, the phrase tasting like cardboard. "And do not put my daughter's face anywhere." Another click. The lens blinked like an indifferent eye. The man started walking backward, trained, aware, never close enough to be a threat, always close enough to be a problem. "You're a public figure," he said. "Markets care about character. Shareholders care. The public can wait," Lucas snapped, and then, softer because Lily was listening, "We're done." He ducked into the cafe. The bell over the door rang out like a flimsy insistence that the world could be nice. The barista took one look at his face and Lily's wide eyes and hustled them to a booth near the back. "I've got you," she said, pouring drip coffee without asking. On the house. A kindness, yes. Also a recognition that the circus had arrived and she wasn't interested in being the tent. Rachel texted, "ICU stable. Emily's numbers are quiet good. Where are you?" He sent a photo of the coffee and a baby hand reaching for the lid, learning the art of distraction. She replied with a picture of a cartoon sticker, a fierce-looking mama bear and the caption, "Not today, paparazzi." By the time he paid, the man in the windbreaker had collected a friend. They waited across the street like storm cells pretending to be clouds. Lucas pushed the stroller through the rain and ducked into the hospital's side entrance, employees only, buzzing furiously until a harried tech let him pass. The elevators swallowed them in stainless steel calm. In the family room, Madison was waiting, raincoat tidy, umbrella folded with the kind of care that screams, "I control what I can." Her glance went straight to Lily, then to the tote bag under Lucas's arm. "What is that?" she asked. "Emily's journals," he said. "Those are private." "They're hers," he said. "And they're the only place she told the whole truth. I'm trying to learn the part I missed." Madison's jaw tightened at missed. "Learning on the job is bold when the job is a human child," she said. "Also," she held up her phone. A push alert glowed. The same photo of him in the parking structure, stroller, jaw set, rain blurring the edges, was cropped and sharpened, the headline too big for a screen, but somehow there anyway. "San Diego tech star's secret baby, ex-lover in ICU, sources say." The subhead was worse. "Love child scandal at Coastal Memorial." She flicked to another tab. There was already a roundup of 5 clues you missed. That included a blurry crop of the blue scarf and an old photo of Lucas and Emily at a launch party where she was laughing at something he barely remembered saying. This is going to get ugly. He felt it, a tiny rip somewhere under the ribs, where public narrative tried to invade private truth. "She's a baby," he said. "They're calling a baby a scandal." Madison looked like she wanted to argue and also like she didn't have the energy. "The social worker will ask questions," she said. So will a judge, if it comes to that. I'm keeping these. She saved the article into a folder he glimpsed for a second. Guardianship. It was a word with edges. It cut even spelled correctly. He bristled. Is that a threat? It's a record, she said. Lily's safety comes first. And exposure to this. She tilted the phone. This is not safety. Then help me reduce it, he shot back. Don't feed it. Rachel, as if summoned by conflict, slid into the doorway with the grace of someone who'd learned to arrive before fires turned into evacuations. We can get you both out back through the service corridor, she said to Lucas. No cameras there. But you'll need to sign this, she added, producing a form like a magician conjuring a dove. Hospital policy on media engagement and pediatric privacy. It's mostly common sense with legal teeth. He signed without reading every line, trusting the shape of her competence. Madison watched, something like surprise softening the harder lines of her suspicion. On the way down the staff hallway, fluorescent lights, hand-washing posters, a gurney with a squeak Lucas would know in his sleep. Rachel walked beside the stroller and couched her advice inside empathy. You can't outrun the internet, she said, but you can starve it. No quotes, no dramatic gestures. Keep the baby's face off everything. Calm beats spectacle in the long run. What about truth? He asked, and it came out rawer than he intended. Rachel glanced at him, at Lily, at the tote with the journals. Truth is a slow burn, she said, and slow burns still warm a house. They emerged into the loading bay, where rain drummed the metal awning like 1,000 patient fingers. Lucas buckled Lily into the car seat he'd installed at 2 a.m., the instruction manual still dog-eared in the glove box. He'd parked close, anticipating he might need an exit that wasn't the front door. Planning, for once, around a life that wasn't a quarterly roadmap. Before he closed the rear door, Lily reached up and pinched his nose with her tiny fingers, solemn as a priest. He laughed, and the sound felt like oxygen. Okay, he told her. We adapt. He drove back to his place by the slow streets, winding through neighborhoods where no one cared who he was. The condo looked wrong now. Sleek lines, no corner guarded by a plastic gate. Nothing soft except the couch. He carried Lily in on his hip and paused in the doorway, seeing it the way a social worker would. A bowl of keys, a glass coffee table that suddenly read hazard, a balcony that would need a lock he could trust. Welcome home, he said, because saying things out loud gave them edges. We start changing it today. He laid the journals on the kitchen island and opened to a flagged page. If I disappear, Emily had written, it won't be because I don't love him. It will be because I do, and I can't figure out how to love him without dragging my storms across his blue sky. From the window, the city was still rinsing itself clean. On his phone, a new notification bloomed and then another. The machine was feeding. He turned the screen face down. He picked up a tape measure and a notepad. He began a list. Outlet covers, cabinet locks, soft, close everything, a second crib, a high chair that wouldn't pinch small thighs, blackout curtains, yogurt melts. He texted Amanda, the social worker. Home visit? As soon as possible. I want you to see we're safe. Before he could hit send, the phone vibrated again. Madison, we need to talk. Today. It wasn't a request. In the preview, he caught a flash of a scanned PDF heading. Petition for temporary guardianship. The villain at the door, wearing the polite mask of process. Lucas exhaled. Fear tried to make itself bigger. He let it sit across from him like a rude guest and didn't give it anything to drink. We'll fight smart, he told the room, and then to the baby strapped into a borrowed playpen and chewing a silicone giraffe like it owed her money. "We'll fight kind." He slid the journals into a drawer, almost reverent. The blue scarf, he'd brought it home without meaning to, he draped over the back of a dining chair that would soon lose its corners to bumpers. The scarf caught a draft and lifted, a slow wave. He took it as an amen he didn't deserve yet. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Inside, the work began, and somewhere on a server farm hungry for clicks, the story sharpened its teeth. He looked at the list, at the highlighter poised like a promise. He drew the first bright line and didn't stop. 2 days later, the sky over San Diego had that brittle clarity storms leave behind, as if the city had been rinsed in cold water. Lucas stood in his living room, holding a legal envelope that was much heavier than its paperweight should allow. The return address was from Madison's attorney. Inside, petition for temporary guardianship of Lily Carter. The language was polite in a way that hurt more than if it had been hostile. Words like concern, best interests, and protective oversight threaded through paragraphs that made him look like a man who had no business raising a child. Exhibit A. A printout of the tabloid headline with him in the hospital parking lot. Exhibit B. Cropped paparazzi shots. One where Lily's face was mercifully blurred, and one where it wasn't. Exhibit C. A note citing his high-profile executive position and potential instability in balancing corporate demands with caregiving responsibilities. By the time he reached the last page, his hands had gone cold. The hearing date was set for 10 days from now. 10 days to prove he could be her father or lose her to the person who had just tried to take her. His phone buzzed again, this time from the company's board chair, Stanton. The man's voice was smooth, managerial, almost relieved to finally have an excuse. "Lucas, the PR fallout is not ideal. Investors are jumpy. Press is circling like sharks. We think it's in everyone's best interest if you step down, at least temporarily." Lucas stared out the window at the glass towers he'd helped put on the city's map. "Step down," he repeated. "Optics matter," Stanton said. "And right now, the optics are saying distraction. Step aside. Focus on your personal situation. We can make it look voluntary." It wasn't a request. In the silence that followed, Lucas could hear the low hum of his refrigerator and the faint squeak of Lily in her playpen, pulling on the giraffe's leg. He'd spent years building that company, shaping it from a half-baked prototype into something that could outpace the competition. It had been his purpose, his proof. And now, the people who once swore he was indispensable were ready to replace him to protect the quarterly report. "You're asking me to give up the thing I built," he said, the words low but sharp. "We're asking you to keep what matters most," Stanton replied, but the tone was pure self-preservation. "Your daughter. This is your chance to show the court your priorities are in order." After the call, Lucas sat at the kitchen table with 2 stacks in front of him, the guardianship petition and the resignation paperwork Stanton's assistant had just emailed over. Rachel stopped by that afternoon to drop off more formula samples from the hospital. She found him there, staring at the papers like they might rearrange themselves into a better answer. "Rough day?" she asked, and when he laughed without humor, she glanced at the table and understood. "They're hitting you from both sides." "It's like they've coordinated," he said. "Step down to save the company or fight for my kid and lose the company anyway." Rachel leaned against the counter. "You can't do both at full throttle right now. If you pretend you can, they'll use that as proof you're not serious about Lily." He rubbed his forehead. the beginnings of a headache sparking behind his eyes. If I resign, I'm handing my career to people who will gut what I built. If I don't, Madison waves it in court as proof I'm too busy to parent. Then you decide which loss you can live with, Rachel said, her voice steady. Later, when Lily was napping, he pulled out Emily's journals. He opened to an entry written in a shakier hand than the rest. If I tell him I'm pregnant, he'll give up the IPO for me. I can't let him do that. He's been running toward this for years, and I refuse to be the reason he stops. Better to be gone than to watch him shrink his own dreams for mine. Lucas read it twice, then a third time. The truth in those lines wasn't pretty. It was raw and miscalculated and full of love that had been weaponized against itself. She hadn't left because she didn't believe in him. She'd left because she did, and because she thought sacrifice was the only way to love without hurting. He could hear Henry's voice in his head. Don't let silence say the words love should speak. For the first time in months, maybe years, Lucas knew exactly what he wanted to say, and to whom. That night, he drafted a statement. Not for the board, not for investors, not for Madison's attorney, for the court. It told the story of Emily's decision in her own words, quoting the journal entry. It made clear that he had been kept in the dark, that the first time he'd known about his daughter was the night of the accident, and that since then, every choice he'd made had been to keep her safe. The next morning, his attorney filed both his formal resignation as CEO and his declaration for the custody case. The stock price dipped within hours of the resignation announcement. Headlines spun it as scandal containment. Stanton called to offer regret, but Lucas didn't take the call. Instead, he packed Lily's diaper bag and took her to the park for the first time. She gripped the swing chains with fierce little hands, hair blowing across her face, laughing in bursts like she couldn't quite keep joy inside her small frame. For the first time in days, Lucas laughed with her. Not the careful, quiet laugh he'd been using to keep the world from noticing, but the kind that cracked something open. By the time they left, he'd decided the board could have their company. Madison could have her day in court. But he was done letting fear or silence decide what love was allowed to keep. And when he buckled Lily into the car seat, he caught sight of the blue scarf folded on the passenger seat. He reached over, brushed his thumb along the worn knit, and felt the shape of a promise forming. He wasn't done fighting. Not by a long shot. The clerk at the probate window was already flipping the closed sign when Lucas slid through the metal detector with Lily on his hip and a binder under his arm. He'd parked in the 15-minute zone and sprinted the marble steps. The blue scarf knotted to the stroller handle like a flag that meant hold the line. The binder held copies of Emily's journal pages in plastic sleeves, a chain of custody letter from his attorney, and a motion to admit new evidence. He was late in the day, early in the case, and exactly on time for the truth. "Please," he said, breath tight, setting the binder down like it contained something fragile. "Emergency filing for the Carter guardianship matter." The clerk eyed Lily, who responded by offering a goldfish cracker with diplomatic seriousness. The woman's mouth softened. "Window 3, she said, sliding the sign back to open with a conspiratorial twitch. "Hurry." They made it. Stamped, docketed, time-stained. He exhaled, chest burning, and texted his attorney. Filed. Journals included. Motion to admit. An hour earlier, he hadn't known about the last journal at all. He'd been sorting laundry with that rookie dad concentration, holding up a onesie like it was a philosophical question, when the dryer thumped something that wasn't cloth. He reached in and pulled out a composition notebook, with a coffee stain shaped like Florida on the cover. A post-it clung to the front. "For you if I ever forget how to say it out loud." Inside, in Emily's neat letters, was the night he'd been chasing a reckless investment, and she'd learned she was pregnant. The exact hinge the outline of his life had swung on without him knowing. She'd written the entry and never mailed the truth. Fear had laced it to the blue scarf and walked out the door. Now the pages did the talking he and Emily had both failed to do. Back home, Lily fell asleep in the car before he could unbuckle her. Her mouth parted in the kind of trust that dismantles defense systems. He carried her upstairs and let her sleep on his chest while he drafted a short, unslick declaration. "I didn't know. I should have. If she'd told me, I would have chosen them, both. I'm choosing them now." Morning broke like clean glass on the day of the temporary orders hearing. Family Court Department 5 sat 3 stories up, with a view of a downtown that always looked better through other people's windows. Amanda, the social worker, waited at the bench with a manila folder and a calm that felt earned. Rachel had traded scrubs for a navy dress and sat 2 rows behind, hands folded, jaw set. Madison stood with her attorney, sleek suit, perfect part, paperwork squared to 90-degree angles. She didn't look at Lucas at first. "Case of Carter Minor," the bailiff called. "Petition for temporary guardianship." They rose. Lily gnawed the ear of the silicone giraffe with holy concentration. Madison's attorney moved first, voice polished, cadence designed to make concern sound like policy. "Your Honor, we ask the court to place the child with her maternal aunt pending a full evaluation. The purported father is a high-profile founder at the center of a media firestorm. Exposure has already occurred. Tabloid photographs, rumor-mongering headlines. He's newly resigned from his company, which raises additional questions about stability." Lucas kept his eyes on the judge, a woman with silver-streaked hair and the expression of someone who'd seen every variety of sincerity and wasn't impressed by any that arrived late. When it was his turn, his attorney slid the binder forward. "We move to admit contemporaneous writings from the child's mother," counsel said. "They explain why she concealed the pregnancy and why Mr. Harrington was unaware until the night of the accident. They establish love, not neglect, as the origin of the separation. And they show that since learning the truth, Mr. Harrington has acted singularly to protect and parent Lily." Madison's attorney objected. "Foundation, authenticity, hearsay." Lucas's lawyer countered. "Personal writings, corroboration, relevance to best interests." The judge skimmed the pages with a practiced wrist, pausing at one entry and reading silently long enough for Lucas's pulse to sync to the courtroom clock. "Objection overruled," she said finally, and slid the binder into the file. "Admitted for the limited purpose of explaining circumstances and intent." Rachel testified next, her voice steady as the monitors she lived with. She described the night of the storm, the way Emily had checked the car seat, the words she managed before the anesthesia. "Lucas, take care of her." She described Lucas learning the latch and lift of bottles, the swaying hip that finally soothed Lily, the practical tenderness of a man turning his life into something softer without turning it into spectacle. Madison took the stand after, and here the story tilted into gray. She spoke about a childhood where she'd been the reliable one while Mason spun out, about the relief and resentment braided into care. She admitted she'd saved articles about Lucas not to smear him, but because she was afraid of losing the last family she understood. Her lawyer displayed a screen grab of the headline and a pixelated photo. Lucas felt the rip under his ribs widen. "Ms. Carter," the judge said, cutting gently through the posture, If the court were to keep the child with her father for now, what would you need to feel safer about that? Madison blinked, as if the question had come in a language she didn't expect. Accountability, she said finally. A plan. And for him to say he knows what he doesn't know. Lucas stood when allowed. I don't know a lot, he said, plain as concrete. But I'm learning fast. And I have people who'll stop me before I learn the hard way. Her pediatric team, Ms. Amanda here, Miss Rachel there. He gestured, then added, because silence had already done enough damage. And I should have asked more questions when Emily was here to answer them. I didn't. I won't make that mistake again. Amanda delivered her preliminary report. Home visit completed, immediate hazards identified and mitigated, outlet covers installed, balcony lock upgraded, chemicals stored high, cabinet latches latched. She described Lily's secure attachment behaviors with Lucas. Reach, soothe, settle, and recommended continuity of care while broader evaluations proceeded. In short, she concluded, the child appears safe, bonded, and well-attuned in Mr. Harrington's care. The judge leaned back. Ms. Carter, Mr. Harrington, I'm not here to referee a press cycle. I'm here to stabilize a 14-month-old human. The evidence, as of this minute, supports maintaining physical custody with Mr. Harrington, subject to court supervision. Ms. Carter will have liberal visitation and joint decision-making on medical matters, while Ms. Emily Carter remains incapacitated. Both parties will enroll in a co-parenting course specialized for kin and non-marital caregivers. A gag order is issued regarding the child's likeness. Violations will be sanctioned. The gavel wasn't dramatic. It was a soft tap that felt like a bridge lowering. Madison exhaled through her nose, somewhere between relief and defeat. Lucas swayed once, knees catching, before he felt Lily's hand press the drawstring of his hoodie, her tiny ritual of steadiness. Outside, the hallway buzzed with other people's urgencies. Madison approached, shoulders squared as if she had marched across worse floors. She looked at Lily first, and Lily, who had no patience for adult politics, offered her the well-chewed giraffe. I don't want to be your enemy, Madison said, voice low. I wanted control because everything else felt like weather. She hesitated. Those pages, they sounded like her. They are her, Lucas said, and they make both of us look less like villains and more like people who got scared at the same time. Something in her posture unclenched a degree. The press will keep trying. They're already calling my office. If you say anything, they'll spin it. I'm done letting silence do the wrong job, he answered. But I'm also done feeding the machine. No quotes, just parenting. Rachel caught up with them on the plaza steps. How'd we do? She asked, though her eyes had already scanned the thin smiles on both faces and decoded the answer. Temporary orders, Lucas said. She stays with me, visits with Madison, check-ins, classes. He paused, then added, more to himself than to anyone else. A plan. Rachel bumped his shoulder with a nurse's friendly precision. Plans are how we tell fear to take a number. They were almost to the curb when his phone buzzed. Unknown number, local. He almost let it go to voicemail, then answered because too many unknown numbers had turned out to be his life lately. A man's voice, roughened and tentative. Is this Lucas? It's Mason, Emily's brother. The name landed like a coin, dropped into still water. Ripples touched rooms he hadn't entered yet. I heard about the accident. I'm clean. I've been clean. And I think I can help you understand why she left. There's more you don't know. Lucas glanced at Madison, who had stopped 2 steps down and turned, eyebrows lifting in a question that felt like a truce. He looked at Lily, who was busy conducting a private symphony with her giraffe. He thought of the judge's order: stabilize the child. He thought of the binder, heavy now not with paper but with permission to speak. "Okay," he said into the phone, the word both invitation and boundary. "Let's talk, but we do it my way. Sober, honest, and with Lily's well-being in the center of the table." On the other end, a long breath, then, "Deal." He hung up and felt the day re-hook him, another wave gathering just beyond the break. The truth he'd brought into the light had carried them this far. Now another layer waited. Beside him, Madison lifted her chin toward the parking lot. "Coffee?" she asked, the word shaped like a compromise. "Yeah," he said. "Coffee." They started down the steps together, imperfect allies with a shared map, a stubborn baby, and a story that had finally decided to stop hiding from its own voice. And somewhere 3 floors up, Emily lay beneath the quiet tick of machines, the blue scarf folded like a promise at her side, while the people she loved learned how to say the words they should have said before. The days after the hearing had a strange stillness, like the pause between the inhale and the exhale. The kind of quiet that wasn't empty, but charged, waiting for the next move. Lucas found himself filling it with small, deliberate routines. Every morning began at the hospital. He'd get Lily dressed, strap her into the new car seat, no more loaner stroller squeaking down the hall, and drive to Coastal Memorial before the rush hour choked the streets. He always brought the blue scarf, folded in the diaper bag beside a plastic container of puffs and a bottle of water. Emily's room had shifted since the first week. The swelling in her face was gone, her bruises fading to pale shadows. Machines still kept the score of her vitals, but now they seemed to hum in a more relaxed tempo. Lucas started draping the scarf over her every day, not for warmth, but for recognition, like leaving a light on in the window for someone who might be trying to find their way home. On the second morning after the hearing, he sat by her bed with one of the journals open. His voice was low but clear. "You once wrote that you felt like a house with too many locked rooms," he read aloud. "You said you wanted to give me the keys, but were afraid I'd get lost inside." He stopped there, watching her face for any flicker, any muscle twitch. Nothing. "I'm not lost," he said softly. "Not anymore. I'd take every key, every room, every drafty hallway, and I'd stay." Rachel arrived mid-sentence, her steps so light they barely broke the room's rhythm. "Still no change?" "Not yet," he said. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Talk anyway. Sometimes it's the familiar cadence that helps them map the way back." Lucas nodded. "That's what I'm hoping." By the third day, it wasn't just him reading. Rachel brought Lily in for a short visit during her lunch break, the little girl toddling around the corner of the bed, gripping the rails like they were monkey bars. She pressed her palm to Emily's blanket, then looked up at Lucas as if to ask if she was doing it right. "She'll remember this," Rachel said. "How? She's 14 months old." "Memory isn't all pictures and dates," Rachel replied. "Sometimes it's just the warmth of a hand, the sound of a voice. That kind of memory sticks without you even knowing." Henry came by one rainy afternoon, the brim of his felt hat dripping onto the linoleum. He brought a paper bag of oatmeal cookies, not too sweet, he promised, and settled in the chair across from Lucas. "I missed my chance to tell my wife I was sorry for all the things I thought were too heavy to say," Henry told him. "One minute I was waiting for the right time. The next, there was no more time." Lucas folded the page he'd been reading from. "That's not going to happen here." "Good," Henry said. But don't just wait for her to wake up to say the important parts. Sometimes, speaking them now is how you get them to open their eyes. At night, the quiet followed Lucas home. Lily would sleep, her tiny breaths marking the dark like a metronome, and he'd sit in the living room with the journals. He learned how Emily's father had slowly withdrawn from her life after her mother left, how Mason's addiction had turned birthdays into disasters, how she'd built her adult years on a foundation of self-reliance so strong that even love couldn't pry it open. He also saw himself in her entries, how she'd written about his relentless drive, the way his ambition seemed bulletproof to everyone but her, the fear she had that she'd pull him off course. One passage stopped him cold. If Lucas ever finds this, I hope he knows I loved him enough to disappear. I didn't want to be the reason he gave up the life he fought for. He closed the journal and looked across the room at the baby monitor, where Lily was curled under a pale pink blanket. You weren't the reason, he murmured. You were the reason I'd have chosen differently. The press noise began to fade during this phase, exactly as Rachel had predicted. Without fresh pictures or sound bites, the internet lost interest. Madison stuck to the court order, visiting twice a week. At first, her presence was stiff, her eyes darting to every unfamiliar detail in his home. But over time, she began to soften, not in trust exactly, but in recognition that he wasn't improvising his way through fatherhood anymore. During one visit, Madison found Lily on Lucas's lap, both of them bent over a picture book. She's starting to look more like Emily every day, Madison said, almost to herself. Lucas glanced up. That's not a bad thing. No, Madison said, and this time there was no edge in her tone. It's not. The quiet wasn't peace exactly. It was maintenance, holding the line while life waited for a decision. But Lucas had learned to live inside it, to make it work for him. He baby-proofed every inch of the condo. He memorized Lily's hunger cues and the songs that could end a meltdown. He read every journal entry twice, and every day, without fail, he went back to the hospital. He read. He talked. He told Emily what Lily had done that morning, how she'd tried to feed the giraffe to the toaster, how she'd waved at a bus like she was greeting an old friend. He told her about Madison's visits, about Amanda's next check-in, about the park they'd found 3 blocks away with the swing set perfectly sized for Lily's legs. Sometimes, he ran out of stories and just sat there, the blue scarf between his fingers, breathing in time with the quiet beeps of the monitors. On the 12th day, as he packed up to leave, Rachel intercepted him in the hallway. You're doing more than most would, she said. Feels like I'm doing nothing. Sometimes showing up is the thing, Rachel replied. And you've been showing up every single day. That night, Lucas fell asleep with the journal open on his chest, the page heavy with a line that seemed written for this moment. Even in the quiet, love is still moving. He didn't know it yet, but the quiet was about to break. Morning found the ICU washed in a clean, lemony light, the kind custodians leave behind like a quiet blessing. Lucas stood at the window, rocking Lily against his shoulder, reading another paragraph from the journal he'd nearly memorized. He didn't expect anything to change. He'd taught himself not to expect. He spoke anyway, voice low and steady, the way you talk to a skittish bird you hope might land in your open palm. We regret not the things we did, but the things we waited too long to do. He read, the line Henry had quoted, the one Emily had underlined later in her own careful hand. He closed the notebook, draped the blue scarf along the blanket, and reached for Emily's hand. Her fingers twitched. He froze, convinced he'd imagined it, that it was the wishful thinking of a man who'd run out of other tricks. Then her eyelids fluttered. Once, twice, a tremor of will climbing up from somewhere deep. The monitors kept their calm pulse, but Lucas's heart sprinted a lap around the room. "Rachel!" he called, not loud. He didn't want to scare the moment into retreat, but urgent enough to bend the air. Rachel stepped in at a nurse's trot, already checking lines and pupils and reflexes. "Emily?" "Hey, Emily," she said, voice tuned to that narrow band between coaxing and command. "If you can hear me, squeeze my hand." A pause that swallowed a year. Then, pressure. Faint but undeniable. Lily squealed as if recognizing a shift she had no words for, and reached a palm toward the blanket. Emily's eyes opened to slits, then wider, the color washing back into them like a tide returning. She scanned the ceiling, the light, the window, the shape of the machines, and then, like a compass snapping north, found Lily first. Her mouth moved, cracked lips shaping a sound that was mostly breath and ache, and then it became a word. "Hi." Lucas's laugh came out as a sob that had been practicing for weeks. "Hey," he said, leaning in, letting Emily see Lily. "We're here." Emily's gaze traveled from the child's face to his, and something complicated crossed her features. Relief, fear, recognition, the startled gratitude of finding the world stubbornly still here. Her throat worked. "You stayed," she whispered. "I did," he said. "I'm not leaving." Rachel handled the choreography, page the attending, adjust the drip, humidify the air, a dozen tiny tasks that looked like magic until you knew the work behind them. "Keep it short," she said, smiling without hiding her tears. "She's awake, not invincible." Emily blinked slow, like each second cost more than the last one. "Lily?" she said again, tasting the name. The little girl pressed her small hand flat to the blanket by Emily's fingers, solemn as a vow. Lucas guided Emily's hand an inch closer, and Lily covered it with hers, accepting the terms of this reunion on instinct. "I'm sorry," Emily whispered, the words worn and heavy and new all at once. "For what?" Lucas asked, gently, because there were 100 answers and only one that mattered. "For leaving. For not telling you. For thinking I was protecting you when I was really just, afraid." A breath. "I thought you'd choose me over your dream, and I couldn't let you do it. I thought disappearing was mercy." He shook his head, not to correct her, but to clear the fog of everything they'd let silence do on their behalf. "I should have asked better questions. I should have noticed what you were carrying and said out loud that I can carry it too." He glanced at the scarf, at Lily's hand, at the journals stacked like spare hearts on the chair. "I'm sorry for not staying in the conversation until it hurt less." A tiny smile ghosted her lips. "You always did talk like a founder," she murmured. "Occupational hazard." He took a breath, steadying. "I resigned," he said, "from the company." Her eyes flared in surprise. "Lucas?" "It was time," he said simply. "Because of Lily. Because of you. Because the thing I didn't know I wanted finally told me its name." He waited for regret to sting. It didn't. "I'm still me, just reallocated." Rachel gave them a few minutes. The attending checked reflexes and cranial nerves. Good signs rolled in like cautious surf. By the time Rachel clicked the rails up and dimmed the lights, Emily had slipped into a cleaner kind of sleep, the body choosing repair over fight. Outside the room, the hospital corridor felt like a different country. Lucas leaned against the wall, Lily tucked under his chin, the fatigue lifting off him one damp layer at a time. That's where Madison found them, coat draped over her arm, hair pulled back like someone arriving for a hearing she might not need to attend anymore. "She's awake?" Madison asked, and when Lucas nodded, she pressed a hand to her mouth and looked away, assembling herself. When she looked back, her shoulders had shed some of their armor. "I was in the lobby, about to go to a meeting." The pause was telling. Lucas didn't make her explain the kind of meeting that eats a day and declares it a win. "Want to see her?" he asked. "In a minute," she said. She looked at Lily first, a habit she'd picked up that he respected, and then at him. "You missed a press call this morning," she said, more observation than accusation. "I'll miss more," he replied. "I'm not doing the machine." Madison looked toward the room. "I spent the week assembling reasons to keep control," she said. "I made lists, color-coded. It felt like safety. But watching you resign, watching you show up, hearing you read to her even when she couldn't answer." She exhaled. "I think I was trying to punish you for not being who I needed you to be last year. That's not Lily's problem to solve." He waited. He'd learned the value of giving a sentence room to land. "I'm withdrawing the petition," she said, the words steady. "Not because I trust you completely. I don't think either of us has earned that yet. But because I understand now that you're not the risk I should be managing. You're the other adult who loves her." Lucas felt something unspool inside his chest. Less triumph than relief. Less victory than a chance to stop bracing for the blow. "Thank you," he said. "And you're still in it. Liberal visitation, joint medical decisions, classes, the whole court order stands. I want you there. She needs you there." Madison nodded, blinking fast. "I'll still be cautious." "Good," he said. "Caution is a kind of love when it's pointed the right way." They went in together. Emily slept, color better, breath unlabored. Madison stood at the foot of the bed and touched the metal rail with 2 fingers like a superstition. "Hey, Em," she whispered. "It's me. I'm here, and I'm going to try not to make everything worse by trying to make it perfect." Lucas sat and read again, not because Emily could follow the plot, but because cadence builds a bridge. Lily babbled, offering editorial comments in a language that forgives easily. When Emily stirred, her eyes found them as if her mind had placed pins in their positions on a map. "Mad," she rasped. Madison stepped closer, cheeks wet. "Yeah," she said, smiling through it. "I'm right here." Outside, Lucas's phone buzzed on silent. A calendar block for a product roadmap review he'd forgotten to delete. He swiped it away without opening. Instead, he texted Amanda a single line. "Status, Emily awake. We'll be here all day." Then he put the phone face down and let the room set the only agenda that mattered. Hours passed in the good kind of slow. Rachel ran interference on well-meaning staff who wanted updates. Henry wandered in with a thermos of tea and a nod that said, "Told you to say the words." The blue scarf stayed where it belonged, a banner not of ownership but of return. Lucas kept reading. Journal lines Emily had written on nights she'd mistaken silence for sacrifice, so that when she was fully back, they wouldn't have to guess at the parts that hurt. Near sunset, a nurse opened the blinds and the room filled with soft gold, San Diego apologizing for the storm it had thrown at them weeks before. Emily turned her face into the light. "Second chances," she whispered, half to herself. "I used to think they were luck." Her eyes moved to Lily and then to Lucas. "They're choices, aren't they?" He nodded. "Every hour." Madison slipped her phone back into her pocket without checking the message that had buzzed there. "I canceled my meeting," she said casually. Then, with less armor, "I didn't want to miss this." No fanfare followed. No triumphant music swelled. Just Lily clapping, because clapping is what you do when the adults you love finally get in rhythm with one another. Just the monitors beeping their contented metronome. Just three people choosing, in small, ordinary ways, not to wait any longer to say what they should have said sooner. The quiet phase was over. What came next wasn't noise. It was life. Messy, supervised by a court for now. Populated by a stubborn aunt, a humbled father, an old friend with a felt hat, and a woman waking to the proof that love doesn't vanish when it hurts. It learns new rules. It keeps showing up, and it speaks out loud, so silence can finally rest. 6 months later, the storms were just something people mentioned in past tense, like a season they'd survived together. The hospital visits had tapered to follow-ups, Emily now moving through rehab with the stubborn focus of someone determined to make her own breakfast again. Lily had grown from a tentative walker to a full-tilt runner, and Lucas's condo bore the joyful scars of it. Faint crayon lines just above the baseboards, a dent in the coffee table corner from a runaway toy truck, the balcony transformed into a miniature jungle of potted plants for the bees. That Sunday morning, the three of them were walking Del Mar Beach. The tide was low, revealing a long stretch of wet sand that gleamed like bronze. Lucas carried Lily on his shoulders, her legs dangling against his chest, her hands patting the top of his head in an absent, rhythmic way. Emily walked beside him, the blue scarf looped loosely around her neck, ends trailing in the breeze. The waves whispered in their slow collapse, erasing footprints almost as quickly as they were made. It struck Lucas, how the ocean was always in the act of letting go, and how maybe that was the secret to its endless return. They stopped near a cluster of tide pools, kneeling to point out sea anemones and shells. Lily crouched down, fascinated by a hermit crab dragging its borrowed home across the shallow water. Emily smiled at the sight, then glanced at Lucas. "She's going to grow up knowing both sides of her family," she said. "That matters to me." "It matters to me too," he replied. And it was true. Madison now joined them for weekly park days, and while they still clashed over small things, bedtime, snacks, the exact right SPF, they both kept their promises in the big things. Henry's voice lived in Lucas's mind more often now, sometimes arriving without invitation. Don't let silence say the words love should speak. He thought about it while pushing Lily on the swing, while cooking dinner with Emily, while answering Madison's questions without defensiveness. "You remember," Emily said suddenly, eyes on the horizon, "when you told me you resigned? I thought you'd regret it in 6 months." "Do I?" he asked. She tilted her head. "Do you?" He shook his head slowly. "I traded a company for a life. Turns out they're not the same thing." They walked on. Pelicans skimmed low over the water. A surfer rode a long wave all the way to shore, stepping off as if he'd simply decided the ride was done. No drama. "Henry came by rehab last week," Emily said after a while. "Brought me tea, asked how I was feeling. Then he asked if I'd forgiven myself yet. I didn't know what to say." "What did you say?" "I told him I was still figuring out what exactly I needed forgiveness for." She looked at him, and he said, "That's the thing. Sometimes you think you're asking forgiveness for the wrong you did to someone else, but really, you're asking for the right to start loving yourself again." Lucas smiled. "That sounds like Henry. He's right, though. I'm working on it. They reached the pier, where shadows of the wooden pilings striped the sand. Lily insisted on walking by herself now, her tiny footprints weaving between theirs before the tide swept them away. Lucas watched the ocean undo their paths, wave after wave. "You know," he said, "I used to think second chances were luck. Something the universe handed you if you waited long enough." "And now?" Emily asked. "Now I think they're a choice, a risk, something you have to reach for with both hands, knowing it might slip away anyway." Emily studied him for a moment. "So what's your choice?" He glanced down at Lily, who was laughing at the way foam slid around her sneakers. "To keep showing up, no matter how messy, no matter how loud or quiet it gets." A breeze lifted Emily's scarf, and she caught one end before it could fly free. "Then I guess we're choosing the same thing." They didn't need to say more. The rhythm of the waves, the shrieks of gulls overhead, Lily's delighted chatter, all of it filled the space where silence might once have lived. As the sun began to dip, they turned back, their footprints again fading into nothing behind them. The impermanence no longer felt like loss. It felt like proof that what mattered was the act of walking together, not the marks left behind. At the parking lot, Lucas buckled Lily into her seat and kissed the top of her head. She reached up, catching his drawstring in that old, familiar way, a tiny reminder of the night they'd first met. He closed the door gently, slid behind the wheel, and looked over at Emily. "You ready?" he asked. She smiled, a quiet, steady kind of smile. "Yeah, let's go home." As they pulled away, Lucas thought again of Henry's words, the ones that had stuck like a hook in the center of his chest. "We regret not the things we did, but the things we waited too long to do." He didn't know what storms might come next. He didn't know what footprints they'd leave, or how long they'd last before the tide claimed them. But he knew this. He'd speak the words, take the risk, and keep walking. Because in the end, that was the only way to make a second chance real. And somewhere out on the horizon, the ocean kept erasing, kept returning, kept choosing to meet the shore again,